So Trunks, my glorious lavender hair-dyed king, one of the most well-respected characters in Dragon Ball, is quite the dilemma. Because on one hand, he is sensible, he gets shit done, and actually lacks the #1 weakness of most Saiyans, that being hubris! But on the other hand, he also simultaneously managed to set off a ton of future events that were so destructive that it eventually led to an entire multiverse being destroyed. But to understand how we got here in the first place, we need to go back into the history of Trunks. His upbringing is basically what happens when you live in Toronto, a place littered with Cybertrucks and polyester clothing made by Dr. Briefs, who's currently in Space Vegas probably. And unfortunately in this timeline, the group leader is MIA because his dog stepped on a bee. And as a result, everyone gets cooked by the finance exam because actually training for it ahead of time is for nerds. And so, all that remains is the king of bookworms and, well, Trunky Dunky, of course. So the king of bookworms decides to teach Trunks how to bleach his hair, because whatever lavender shit he's currently using in a post-apocalyptic world is not it, Chief. However, if we fast forward a bit, it's not exactly going well, because he's currently getting cooked by some blonde bitch at Darien Lake. So his master needs to hide him in his foreskin so he doesn't lose Jerkmate Finals. But unfortunately, with the power of the femboy park ranger and the blonde bitch from Darien Lake, the foreskin gets blown straight off, along with his gooning arm. So later on, Trunks decides that he wants to run it back so that he can go on the ride of steel. However, the King of Worms decides that having him around is nothing more than a liability. So he uses his non-dominant arm to sleep his ass. And I won't lie, even without his gooning arm, he still managed to put in legit work on the androids. I am so proud of my king role. But unfortunately, sometimes even the Grand Master Bader must stop stroking. So the history of the bookworm ends here. So a few years later, Trunks decided that he wants to try swinging his prosthetic ass sword at the androids. Unfortunately, what he fails to realize is that this sword is perpetually stuck in the middle of December, and it never fucking works! Not to mention that he is not even close to the power level of the Bookworm King when he got his ass beat. Yet, he still somehow thinks that he can take on the androids. I'm telling you, man, that Vegeta DNA is still in there somewhere. But to put it into other words, Trunks gets cooked so hard that he straight up puts Super Saiyan, the most powerful, legendary form in the series at this time, on fraud watch. Cause this performance is just tragic. Bro cannot even budge these androids an inch, much like he can't budge the subscribe button. But if you're better than Trunks, then be sure to subscribe to the Super Kami Jacob channel. Also, what the hell did this random R&D guy from the military give to these androids that allowed them to be stronger than his Super Saiyan in the first place? But not only that, but also the fact that they have the capability to run off literal infinite energy? You could power the whole world with just a single femboy park ranger, dude! So Trunks takes his fraud ass into the time machine, what he should have done in the first place, to the middle of Z. But in actuality, he doesn't actually go back, but rather, he creates a parallel universe which is directly influenced by him. But we'll get back into that in a second, because for now, Trunks must deliver the medicine to Goku, who will definitely eat it and not let himself get cooked by an overweight Chaozu. This is also where the time stuff gets low-key weird, because Trunks waited 8 months for the time machine to recharge so he could take a 3-year trip into the future. Now, I'm no Albert Einstein, but I don't think 8 months is equal to 3 years. But for the sake of this video, we're just gonna assume that Trunks lost a few screws from getting his ass beat, and that his time perception skills are ass. So he accidentally waited 3 years instead of the original 8. Now I admit, the main flaw with this theory is the fact that Trunks would casually have to be in a hiding hole for 3 years while the androids were casually destroying the Earth, but shh! Don't think about it too much, baby girl. Also, Trunks realizes that this timeline is still completely different, because Goku got cooked by an overweight Chaozu, but at least he's still alive. And Piccolo is currently beating the shit out of some elderly man and sending him to their nursing home across the street. So Trunks is rightfully confused, because what he expected to see was the twink femboy park ranger and that bitch from Six Flags. But instead what he sees are villains so washed that Akira Toriyama was forced to step in and remold these villains into something not quite as washed, such as the all-new Samsung washing machine. Also, literally nobody mentions the fact that anyone could have prevented the saga from happening by simply sending Dr. Gero to the nursing home early, but didn't because of fucking hubris. But don't tell Trunks. He's been through enough tragedy, man. He also learns why his mother never talked about his father. Surprise, surprise. The guy that beats the shit out of literal children for losing a chess game is not a very good father. But who will win? The common sense of Trunks or the hubris of Vegeta? Well, unfortunately, the answer is no one. Because Vegeta gets rejected by the girl from Six Flags and Trunks loses his blonde hair dye, disappointing his bookworm king once again. Now fast forward a bit and Trunks discovers another time machine. And what he uncovers is that something had somehow gotten to his exact same time machine at a different point in time and traveled to here at the same time Trunks did. And that something was Cell. Now remember in my last video when I didn't talk about how the hell Cell even got into this universe in the first place? No? Well, watch the video then! After this one. What are you waiting for? Please? My hubris needs this. Well, anyway, time travel in stories are always a bitch. So the best way I can think of to break this down is with Microsoft Visio. Please sponsor me, I'm so fucking poor. So first in Foreskin, we have Trunks 2. He traveled in the past to give Goku his medicine, and despite him not eating it, he still ends up surviving, so all is well. So you're probably already wondering why I am calling this Trunks 2 instead of Trunks or Trunks 1. Well, that is because this is not the first Trunks. Because you see, the first Trunks managed to go back in time, defeat the androids, go back to his own timeline, and defeat the androids there, which is very similar to what we would see later on, except there's one main difference. Trunks isn't strong enough to take on Cell, even though he somehow defeated both of the androids in the previous timeline and his own, indicating that he got stronger, but still wasn't strong enough to defeat Cell, who at the time was weaker than the androids. Marty! This makes no fucking sense! So what happens next is that Trunks 1 gets slapped silly by Cell, but somehow Cell ends up in the Trunks 2 universe, even though the universe Trunks 1 went into was entirely separate from that universe. Marty! How the fuck does this work? But anyway, that is more or less why the Cockroach King is here. Now, why all this happened as a result of Trunks giving Goku some random medicine from CVS 3 years ago, I couldn't tell you. So Trunks 2, after dragging his balls off the ground, once again decides to train with his abusive father. Just make sure you don't play chess with him and you'll be fine. But to give Trunks credit where credit is due, he actually does get a lot stronger. However, I'm pretty sure he would have gotten way stronger if he actually had proper guidance. Because what he ends up doing as a result is overcompensate. Because you see, Trunks thinks that as long as he is a 260-pound bodybuilder, he can take on pretty much anyone. But what he fails to realize is that Trunks has been collecting data on not just the Z fighters, but UFC fighters as well. Now, why is this important, you may ask? Because if you know anything about the UFC, you know that they are absolute monsters. And it does not matter if they are 100 pounds less than you. And it's pretty dumb that Trunks doesn't realize this ahead of time, but simultaneously, this is on Vegeta for not informing Trunks properly, which just goes to show how shitty of a teacher he is. But I'm not really surprised, to be honest. Lord Farquaad never pegged me as a very good teacher anyway. And so, Trunks gives up against Cell because he realizes that there is no way he can win, which is pretty bad. But also, it's low-key better than getting his back blown out. A little later, Trunks fucking dies, but gets revived after the first grader Texan took care of business. So Trunks, after having successfully spectated the saving of this timeline, goes back to his own. And with the new power he has acquired from training with the angry 4'3" man, he manages to take out the femboy park ranger, that bitch from Darien Lake, and that annoying ass cockroach on his wall. So finally, Trunks' timeline can know peace for the first time in literal decades. Even when the Majin Buu saga happens, Trunks doesn't let the tempting power of hubris compel him once again, and he actually listens to Shin about Majin Buu's awakening and manages to kill him, Dabura, and Alibaba. This is quite epic! However, this brief streak comes to an end when we get into Black. Ayo? And Shin also dies, but nobody cares about that because Shin ain't shit. But Black has single-handedly turned Toronto with Cybertrucks into something far worse. He turned Toronto with Cybertrucks into Toronto with Cybertrucks, and the only fast food chain that remains on the planet is Arby's. But that shit tastes so bad that Trunks would rather eat a can of cat food rather than consume that shit. But before we get back into the Black Saga, we need to go forward, actually. Because midway through this arc, everyone discovers that Zamasu is low-key an emo edgelord. Because when Goku Black turned off his VPN to get a better ping against Goku in their fight, Miller Lite and Whis realized that the native IP address was quite similar to a green senzu bean from Universe 10. So they take a quick visit, along with Kakarot, to see if the IP address matches up. So Goku challenges Zamasu to a fight, and Whis and Miller Lite begin taking notes. And what they discover is quite fascinating, because though the IP address isn't the same, it comes really close. So close that they decide to keep an eye on Zamasu a little while longer in case something happens. However, something else significant happens as well, because Goku beating Zamasu single-handedly sets off an era of much more timeline BS. Oh, Marty! Because essentially, Zamasu kills Gowasu for making his scrambled eggs wrong, Whis rewinds time, and Beerus destroys Zamasu. But then how in the world does Goku Black even exist in the first place? Well, that is basically thanks to time ring BS. You see, the Goku Black we see isn't actually separate from the Zamasu that is killed, but rather the exact same one created from the outcome of Zamasu killing Gowasu. It's a weird situation looping where essentially Zamasu kills Gowasu, which allows him to turn into Goku Black. And because Goku Black exists, everyone becomes aware of Zamasu wanting to kill Gowasu and therefore kill him before he can do anything. Does your brain hurt yet? Mine too. But that's not all, unfortunately, because the time ring somehow protects this senzu bean having ass from going down the outcome that would have been his demise. Somehow. Also, apparently, all these time rings in the box were created as a result of Trunks having used the time machine multiple times. So, good job, Trunks. You single-handedly managed to fuck up the entire multiverse and your timeline. But how about the other Zamasu that comes up in Trunks' timeline? Well, you see, this Zamasu came from Trunks' timeline, where he wasn't quite as radicalized by the Twitter echo chamber. And all the convincing he needed from his genocidal counterpart is for him to say that he is lonely. Everyone is scared of him, but he has free coupons to boba tea. In the name of justice, I want that bubba down my throat! So to recap, we have 3 Zamasus. One from the main timeline who gets killed for being cringe, another from Trunks' timeline who is low-key chill because Goku died of bone cancer.
What's the meaning of this, Kakarot?
And the third being Goku Black, who's basically a copy of the first Zamasu from the main timeline who didn't die because of time ring BS. And if we're being completely real, technically, Trunks traveling back in time at the beginning of the Android saga caused all of this to happen. If he had visited Walgreens instead of CVS, then perhaps the outcome would have been a lot different. So anyway, Zamasu and Black almost actually win, because even when Trunks cuts Zamasu's balls in 2, he simply uses the power of his alternative accounts to copy himself infinitely. So now it is virtually impossible to kill him. So they bring in the moderator of the Reddit server to wipe everything off the face of the literal multiverse. And yeah, I do quite literally mean everything. The timeline, the universe, hell, even the multiverse itself are all gone. After all that time, after all that effort, the many decades of struggle to overcome the multi-universal hubris, just for Trunks' timeline to get absolutely cooked in an instant. But luckily, they're just gonna create a whole nother universe where another Trunks and Mai exist. Just casually creating another universal time ripple that will definitely not be consequential in the future whatsoever. Nope! There definitely won't be an alternative timeline created where another Trunks visits the past after having worked at Costco as a cashier for 12 years to pay off the lease for his dogshit sword from Temu! But hey, as long as Trunks and Mai can live their happily ever after in another universe without the existence of Black, they'll be just okay. Just be sure to never tell Trunks that he was actively being groomed by a 70-year-old like this show took inspiration from Jabba's reincarnation, because bro's been through enough tragedies, man. Trunks often falls into the same pits and mistakes as many other characters in Dragon Ball. Hubris, ignorance, and just overall dumbassery. He manages to fall into all of it. Yet, he somehow manages to pull himself out of that hole time and time again, making the plays which actually make the most sense from an intellectual perspective. However, at the same time, he doesn't really have the confidence or strength to make a real difference. The burden he was given to save his entire timeline was simply too much to bear. So even with that newly achieved common sense, it is only a matter of time until another Goku or Vegeta come around from a completely separate universe to fuck everything up all over again. Thanks for watching.